I'd like to start with a film. We're going to have some sound on this.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carlo Coleman. When I was 18, I was told I'd be medication most of my life. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I got said I had bipolar disorder. But I learned through health nutrition and eating clean and exercise I could come clean. And 6 months ago, I was on medication, and I've been off medication for 6 months. And through reading Patrick Holford's Optimal for the Mind, plus the chemistry of connection, I've learned that with a healthy lifestyle, I can do well. And I feel so much better physically, mentally, and emotionally. Just live clean, no alcohol, believe in yourself, and read, and you can come clean too.
Yeah, he turned up at my door in Putney. He just wanted to say thank you for no longer having schizophrenia. So at the Food for the Brain, we funded a review of all the evidence for schizophrenia. And it's well worth reading if you're that way inclined. Arrol is the author. And you'll see all the evidence that exists for different approaches, including methylation. So homocysteine and schizophrenia is very strongly connected, especially in men or boys, teenagers. So 193 schizophrenics, average level is 16 versus 10 for the healthy controls of the same age. So it's a factor that we always look at. A 5-point increase in homocysteine is associated with a 70% increased risk for schizophrenia. I'd never worked with anyone with schizophrenia without measuring homocysteine, and 7 out of 11 schizophrenic patients had the methylation gene polymorphism. So there may be that, predisposition. That's also seen in schizophrenia. I'm going to move quite fast. Generally, schizophrenics, have lower folate levels, and high-dose folate supplementation improves things. So there's a strong link, with the B vitamins, folate. This is one of the nicest studies. 42 schizophrenic patients with plasma levels above 15 are given those B vitamins that lower homocysteine versus placebo over 3 months and have a very significant improvement in their symptoms. So, this is such an easy thing to do. Here we have one of our clients' history of psychotic episodes with frequent harmful thoughts about others and poor sleep. Homocysteine is 14. After following 6 months, he became more stable, felt better, no longer reporting suicidal or harmful thoughts about others. His sleep has improved. His mother describes him as more aware, and his psychiatrist has reduced his medication, and his homocysteine has dropped to 7. Abram Hoffer, I mentioned early on, had this theory that we were producing, or schizophrenics were producing adrenochrome, which would make you hallucinate from adrenaline. So in other words, high stress plus faulty biochemistry could lead to a psychotic state, and that niacin would stop the excess. And he ran the first double-blind study in 1957, and this was followed by a large double-blind study in 1962, where 31 out of 39 patients improved. But unfortunately, this whole area was killed off, and this quite often happens by not studying. They had drug-naive schizophrenics. In other words, they'd just been diagnosed and they were put on the trial. And then other people tried niacin on people who'd been on heavy-duty medication for 5 or more years. They didn't get the same effect. So it's the same with dementia. The way they're trying to kill off the dementia homocysteine thing. A classic study, they took several hundred doctors who had no memory decline at all, no risk factors for memory decline, no depression, which, for example, is a risk factor, and then used the most gross test called the mini mental state exam, which barely changes over 5 years, and then gave them B vitamins or placebo and found no difference. No improvement from the B vitamins, no memory decline, just no nothing. So it's just like a really badly designed study. And what we're saying is people who have raised homocysteine above 11 benefit. It's that subgroup. It happens to be a subgroup of about 2/3 of people over 70, but it's a subgroup. So niacin works very well on recently diagnosed schizophrenics. And, there are various sort of mechanisms that have been proposed. There was a very nice study in 2008 which showed evidence of abnormal niacin receptor binding for schizophrenics. By the way, niacin is called nicotinic acid, and nicotine binds to the same receptor. So one of the things we find helps smokers a lot when they try to quit is taking a lot of niacin. It occupies the same receptor. So one thing you'll find with schizophrenics is they do smoke a hell of a lot and drink a lot of coffee and a lot of sugar. And some of it is, in fact, an attempt to wake up from the very heavy-duty tranquilizers that they're on that just knock them out. So they just try and wake up with stimulant drugs. B12 is also, very strongly related to psychoses, as well as folate. So that's, again, something that can be tested. So these are some of the symptoms that we look for. By the way, pellagra, which is niacin deficiency, B3 deficiency, has the 3 Ds. That is diarrhea, dementia, and dermatitis. And it still exists, but everyone assumes it doesn't. So we have schizophrenic patients who have, itchy skin, loose bowels, and crazy. They're the symptoms of pellagra, that is B3 deficiency. It's just that they need much more than you or I, so they become deficient much more easily. But these are some of the sort of symptoms that we look at. Behind all of these diseases always is inflammation as a sort of systemic underlying process. And we know that high sugar increases inflammation, lack of omega-3 does, lack of antioxidants does, eating foods that you're intolerant to does, being insulin resistant, being overweight. All of these raise inflammation, for example, raising CRP. And there's a lot more studies. If I looked, obviously I haven't looked for a few years, but is psychosis an inflammatory state from stress to inflammation to major depressive disorder, inflamed moods, immunology of major depression? So anything that's going to calm down inflammation is probably going to have a positive effect on your brain. Then there's histamine, which is very important. There's a subgroup, about 10% of schizophrenics, who have high histamine levels. And a number of people, in fact, some of the most productive, creative people have high histamine levels. And when you are a high histamine producer, which is genetic, it comes through the family, you're going to have a few signs. Like, number one, your second toe will be longer than your first. You have, generally longer fingers, longer toes, more prominent veins. You generate more heat. You're hot in bed in more ways than one. So a high sex drive and lots of heat generated. Good teeth because you make more saliva. Marilyn Monroe was high histamine. Abraham Lincoln, that statue that you see in the, by the whatever it's called, the Pentagon, the White House. I don't know what that thing is called, but that's the long hands of a high histamine. Compulsive and obsessive. Very active minds, wake up early, lots of thoughts, need breakfast, good appetite. And about 10% of schizophrenics are high histamine. They use up more nutrients. They need a lot more vitamin C, which is an antihistamine, more B6, more zinc. When they run out of nutrients, they can go into a pit of depression. They love alcohol because alcohol dampens down their crazy mind. So nothing wrong with being a high histamine, but if you run out of nutrients, it can tip you over into depression. So when we have a high histamine family, we're always asking, is there any history of suicide in the family, any history of alcoholism in the family, any history of mental illness in the family? So it becomes very obvious. I was giving a talk the other day, and this guy comes up to me and says, will you sign my book 3 pages from the back in pencil? I knew he was a high histamine type. I saw him approaching just from his body type. And I said, no, I am too, by the way. But I said, no, I only do that on Thursdays. Yeah. Anyway. Studies have shown alterations in histamine receptors in schizophrenic patients. So plasma histaminase was increased in schizophrenics versus controls. The subgroup with the most raised levels were the non-mentally deteriorated patients. So these are not the hospitalized schizophrenics. They're the crazy but quite nice guys you meet in the park, And, it's funny how it goes. I meet quite a few in my line of work. Vitamin C and schizophrenia. You have to give somebody with schizophrenia much more vitamin C to achieve the same blood levels of non-schizophrenics. So vitamin C has an effect on the brain and its function. And if someone is a high histamine type, they're not going to do well on a keto diet. They need a lower protein diet, a low GL diet, and check homocysteine, because homocysteine methylation breaks down histamine. So if you're high histamine and you've got raised homocysteine, in other words, you're bad at methylating, you can't bring your histamine down. And as you know, if you have high histamine, you get migraines, allergies, asthma, eczema, all those sort of histamine-related effects. So they're going to need more vitamin C. I was talking earlier about the MOVE factor. Emotional stress leads to oxidative stress, increased gut permeability, and an increase in what's actually called HPL. I'm just trying to, where is that? We used to call it cryptopyrrole, but it's not cryptopyrrole, it's hemopyrrole. I was hoping, I've forgotten what it's called exactly, but that's what the MOVE factor is. It's an increase in HPL, which is a type of pyrrole. And this is measured in the urine in laboratories. And it's also connected with low zinc. So it's a little bit like the madness of King George. That's slightly different, porphyria. But these are genetic abnormalities connected to pyrroles, very, very zinc dependent. And these people, it's strongly related to stress. These people who cannot tolerate stress. And, it's something that we check for and look for. So are you pyrolyric? Do you get nausea or constipation? By the way, high histamine. So I had a lady on Facebook the other day, a very active Facebook. She said, I can't take vitamin C, I'm allergic to it. Right? I said, you can't be allergic to vitamin C. What happens? And, she reacts to citrus fruit, actually, but that can happen. But I also said, do you sneeze in sunlight? And she said, yes, I do. She said, I'm intolerant of sunlight. Sneezing in sunlight is what happens in very high histamine people. It's a strange symptom, isn't it? But it occurs. And I asked her about her toes and her hands and all that sort of stuff. White spots on the fingernails, nausea, constipation, pale skin which burns easily, frequent colds and infections, stretch marks, irregular periods or impotency, crowded upper front teeth, poor tolerance of alcohol or drugs. So a pyrolyric said, do you drink? No, I can't drink. I can't tolerate drink at all. It just makes me sick. I just can't do it. Poor dream recall. So think zinc and B6. Manganese also helps. So if you test the urine, it's a level above 0.8 units. So again, this is in my book, so you've got the backup of it. I was having an interesting conversation earlier, really about two areas. I didn't have a chance to pull the slides out, but one was about, some people are saying don't eat legumes, don't eat beans, don't eat lentils, all those foods are bad for you. They have lectins and your immune system reacts against it. But the thing is that I don't fully buy that. Number one, we're all different, and some people can tolerate things that others can't. But if you are reacting to the lectin in a food, you're going to get an IgG reaction. So if you do a food intolerance test and you don't react against beans or lentils or whatever, why not? And we then went on to the conversation that you can actually predict the rate of breast cancer simply by knowing a country's intake of beans and milk, and the same with prostate cancer. And that the rural Chinese, this was a 20-year ago study, the rural Chinese who have soy milk every day and they have tofu every day have a 1 in 9,000 lifetime risk of breast cancer and a 1 in 25,000 lifetime risk of prostate cancer. So, it's like, what's going on here? The countries that eat lots of beans, like in Africa, and then we find lentils stuck in the teeth of Neanderthals at least 40,000 years ago. These foods are not as, but they started to be more predominant from about 500,000 years ago when we had fire. The discovery of fire led to the expansion of the diet, including beans. So I don't think beans are bad. And I don't even think that all gluten is bad. And I didn't have a chance to show this, but there's an ancient wheat called Kamut Khorasan. And there are 26 studies now that show that for heart disease, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. And the one I wanted to show you was on irritable bowel syndrome. Very nice study in the British Journal of Nutrition. 6 weeks on kamut wheat, which contains gluten, 2 weeks washout, and then 6 weeks on regular wheat, made into semi-integrale. So it's not completely brown, not completely white. That was to remove the fiber effect, made into bread and pasta, and so it all looks the same. They don't know which. Every single irritable bowel syndrome sufferer in the study got significant improvement in symptoms on the ancient gluten-containing kamut Khorasan wheat. That's very rare in a study, without exception. And the measures in the blood of inflammation reduced in every study I've seen on Khorasan by between 30 and 40% reduction in CRP, IL-6, TNF-alpha. In other words, it's pretty clear, and we know, we've actually been consuming grasses from the DNA evidence for 2 million years. 2 million years, eating seeds and grasses. We didn't start to cultivate it until about, 12, 13,000 years ago. There's a whole other story about that. So I actually don't buy the full story that it's all about gluten. I think there's something that we've done to wheat that is causing a big problem. And we've put the blame firmly on gluten. There's more to it. So this is very interesting. Bipolar and autoimmune go together. Maternal infection or stress or poor nutrition during pregnancy increase both the risk for bipolar and autoimmune disease. Bipolar sufferers have about double the risk of autoimmune diseases, thyroid problems, celiacs, and so on. And monozygotic twins with bipolar have a greater risk of autoimmune disease and vice versa. So I'm very interested in this increase in autoimmune disease and the 5-day fasting mimicking diet, which I've just written a book about. Because in animals, if you do a 5-day diet, you're mimicking fasting, but you get a better result than a total fast. You have to do 800 calories, has to be ketogenic, has to be meat and dairy free, has to be protein below 20, 25 grams, plus a whole lot of extra factors. It triggers this self-repair process called autophagy. And in animal studies, this has reversed type 1 diabetes and Crohn's so far. And type 1 diabetes, yeah. So the animals who do this 5-day process, 10 days off, 5 days on, 10 days off, 4 times, 4 cycles, remake stem cells, which remake beta cells, which make insulin. So this is, without a doubt, very clear studies, no question, the reversal of type 1 diabetes. I saw a report in the news the other day of a man who had stem cell therapy, and he's reversed his type 1 diabetes. Same process. This 5-day fasting mimicking diet is creating stem cells and reversing, rebooting, resetting the immune system. So there are human trials going on right now. I've been in this field since I'm 18. I have a very good nose for what's got substance. So I think avoiding all beans and lentils doesn't have substance, but there are some people that don't respond well to that, for sure. The gluten, it's not all about gluten. And I've been trying to stop writing books, but what happened was my friend Jerome Byrne, who's Britain's award-winning medical journalist, became the journalist for all the keto guys. And he kept banging on about how amazing a keto diet is for reversing diabetes and this and that and whatever. And I challenged him to a duel and said, what can your keto diet do that my low GL diet, can't do? And then we wrote the book, The Hybrid Diet. Like a car, we can run on one or the other. And as we dug deeply into that, we started to realize that there is a value in switching. And towards the end of the book, these are long journeys on book, this 5-day diet thing developed by a guy called Professor Walter Longo, but I think that I've improved on that. Really interesting. So I thought, I got to. we have a chance to reverse autoimmune diseases, we've got to explore it. So that's that. So, lots of books. We had some sent over, and for some reason they haven't arrived. So, don't worry, Eric can get them to you. But we've got the Alzheimer's one, and the stress cure has got a ton of really good stuff in it, and et cetera, et cetera. So we were meant to take a break at this point. I didn't quite get there because I had wanted to introduce you to the psychiatric hotline, the telephone line, which says, "Welcome to the psychiatric hotline. If you are obsessive compulsive, please press 1 repeatedly. If you are codependent, please ask someone to press 2. If you have multiple personalities, press 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if you are schizophrenic, listen carefully, and a little voice will tell you which number to press. And if you're manic depressive, it doesn't matter which number you press, no one will answer. And if you're paranoid delusional, we know who you are and what you want. Just stay on the line so we can trace the call." Okay. So the last part, which I know is very, very close to Eric's heart, is how to end addiction with nutrition. And this is such a piece of gold, and it is such a shame at this point that our treatment centers are not really waking up and asking the right question, which is, why do we become dependent or addicted? We've been talking about neurons, how they connect in the brain with the dendrites and the terminal of the neuron, the axon. So these points of connection. And we've been looking at how one neuron communicates to the next neuron with these chemicals of communication, which are neurotransmitters, and how certain drugs can mimic the effect of the neurotransmitters and take over. We've been looking at how the phospholipids attach to the DHA and exactly how that process works. So the neurotransmitters can be calming, like GABA, for example. They can be stimulating, like adrenaline. So we've touched on adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine as the motivators, and GABA as the peacemaker, and serotonin that makes you happy, and acetylcholine that improves your memory and concentration. And then there are a very fascinating area of tryptamines that keep you connected. So when we have caffeine or nicotine or cocaine or amphetamines, they're stimulants. That's the system that they're working on. So cocaine is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And when you reuptake the ability to recycle something, you get more in the gap. So cocaine not only causes more release of dopamine, which makes you feel fantastic, but also it stops you recycling it. So you get this double hit, which means the next day you go, think I'll go again, and then I'll go again. And gradually you need a little bit more and a little bit more to get the same effect. And by now you're starting not to make the normal substances that would keep you motivated. So you become flat in between. This is down regulation. So addictive substances and behaviors affect the brain. They either mimic your own natural feel-good chemicals or change how they work. You can get the same effect on addicted to the like button on Facebook as you can to cocaine. It's interesting. So during addiction, the brain shuts down its production and reception of neurotransmitters. And you can actually see less receptors for dopamine in cocaine addicts, meth addicts, alcoholics. They've got less receptors. And one of the big questions is, are people wired for this addiction, or does the drug make that happen? And the answer is probably both. So if you get a group of alcoholics together and you say, do you remember your first drink? They say, hell yes. It was like the lights came on. Fantastic. So you meet those people who actually come to life after a bottle of wine. They seem more intelligent, more funny, more animated, more energetic, and while I'm like trying to crawl to bed, completely zonked. So people are reacting a different way. So children who have less dopamine receptors, when they like risks, anything that gets their adrenaline going, they like getting into trouble, taking risks. When they discover sugar, it's like fantastic. You know, this is something that actually works. So this is a lot to do with dopamine reception, and we kind of spoke about that cycle. So there's been a lot of that. Here's Scientific American. Addiction arises in part because habit-forming drugs cause the brain's circuit for assessing reward to deem the drugs more desirable than anything else in life. And that's why addicts will rob their parents, even their children, you know. I met one the other day who'd stolen, you know, his son's guitar and pawned it, you know, so he could buy drugs, you know. That getting those drugs becomes more important than anything. So when the reward system of the brain is working properly, it creates a sense of well-being and satisfaction. When our needs are met, our brain rewards us. Craving, dependency, and addiction is what happens when the reward system goes wrong. So we're talking here about initial relief. If you are reward deficient and you find a substance that makes you feel good and your brain gives you a reward, a payoff, you are going to use that substance again. Tolerance. The more you consume, the more your brain adapts to the presence of these large quantities until you must use larger and larger quantities to get the same effect, causing more and more changes in your brain. Addiction. As neurons in the brain adapt to larger quantities, the brain becomes reliant upon the mood-altering substance and shuts down its production of neurotransmitters. You are addicted to the compound. Addiction equals brain dysfunction equals reward deficiency. What are the causes? Genetic factors. Trauma or stress. Lack of sleep, too much, poor nutrition, including too much sugar, and toxic drug use. So whatever psychosocial issues lead a person to use a numbing and addictive substance, whether it's a breakup in a relationship or whatever it happens to be, once the brain is addicted, you are dealing with a biochemical dependency that needs to be broken. When you scramble your brain, sitting around and talking about it isn't going to unscramble your brain, says Joan Matthews Larson, who run a very successful recovery center called the Health Recovery Center. So Professor Robert Lustig has written this very good book, The Hacking of the American Mind, and he makes clear the difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is dopamine and adrenaline, and you need a trigger and a variable reward, so you now, every time you go down the street, you smell the coffee, I'll have a coffee, and sometimes it works better than others, and you keep wanting coffee. And generally, the more pleasure, the less happiness. Remember, all of these foods are sold as the happy hour, the happy meal. Coca-Cola, happiness in a bottle. We're being sold happiness, but it's not really happiness, it's pleasure that we're being sold, which is transient. Happiness is serotonin. It's connection, it's empathy, it's humanity, it's animals, it's food, it's earth, it's contributing, it's making a difference. It's not like an addiction. It's a feeling of satisfaction when you feel connected and loving and so on. It's just you're at peace. You're not like, I gotta have that again. I gotta have more of that. So the average person touches their phone 2,617 times a day. Do you wake up and the first thing you do is check Facebook, check your likes, LinkedIn hits, be careful of the race to have as many friends, links as possible. Start questioning what you are doing on social media, Facebook, and what is its value. Try giving up Facebook for a week and seeing how you feel. It's called nomophobia. When there's no mobile phone signal, nomophobia. Target solutions to enable smarter usage of digital media. And do watch the Netflix film, The Social Dilemma, because it kind of lays out this in quite a strong way. So we've spoken about the dopamine pathway, tyrosine, the serotonin pathway, tryptophan. And there's a lot of research in this whole area. One of the really fascinating areas that's always been close to me, are the tryptamines. Serotonin is a tryptamine. The basic tryptamine structure is what's shown in green. And whenever there is life, there is 5. In nature, so many natural things are 5, whether it's leaves. 5 is like life and 6 is substance. And the tryptamine contains those 2, as do our DNA proteins, the 5 and the 6. And if you add on the red bit, you've got serotonin. If you add on the yellow bit, you've got melatonin. And the really fascinating compound of all is the only hallucinogen that we make in our brain, which is called dimethyltryptamine. We make it in the brain. It's highest in the pineal gland. And it's extraordinary as a psychologist. If you take in DMT, have you heard of ayahuasca? Yeah, so ayahuasca is DMT. So basically, there are lots of plants that contain DMT, including lentils, for example. But normally our body will break them down. But in the Amazon, various tribes discovered that if they consumed a plant high in DMT, like chacrun is the most common, with the vine, the ayahuasca vine, which contains an inhibitor of the enzyme that breaks it down, they have an experience for about 3 hours. And it's their religion, the whole ayahuasca thing. Now, if you inject it or smoke it, because you can take in pure DMT, what happens in about 6 seconds, in other words, you take an inhale, and by the time you exhale, you have left this planet and gone into another world that is indescribable and as real as this, and unquestionably guided. This is not like getting stoned. You go into another realm and you are shown things. It's just quite phenomenal. As a psychologist, I'm fascinated. I forget who it was who said, if you can't change your mind, who can? Interesting, and we make it in our brain. And it looks like it's released at birth and it's released at death. Very interesting substance. I've written about it in The Chemistry of Connection. Here is some research of some friends of mine on psilocybin. And this is an advanced way of looking at brain scans and which parts of the brain talk to each other. So this is a person in the normal state. They're actually on a placebo. They don't know it. And this is what happens on psilocybin, which is a tryptamine, akin to LSD, which is also a tryptamine. This massive increase of communication across the brain. And parts of the brain talk to other parts of the brain that never talk to each other. It's quite extraordinary. So there's a lot of work going on now on depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, and some beautiful studies giving people in the terror and depression of dying, and terminal illness in the sort of last, weeks or months of life, and giving them psilocybin. And, also with backup psychotherapy or support or whatever. And they have extraordinary experiences and are no longer frightened of dying. So we're talking about a sort of interesting area. Topic for another day's conversation. So dopamine is caffeine, cocaine, sugar, stress, social media overuse, gambling. Serotonin is exercise, sunlight, social interaction, love, empathy, entheogen, sleep, meditation, pets. If you're optimally nourished, it's almost impossible to become addicted. Here is an animal study where animals are, the controls are not given morphine, but they then have the option of trying it, and it looks like they give it a little go, and then they quit. But the vitamin C group are given morphine, so they're, if you like, they're kind of introduced to addiction of morphine, but with vitamin C, morphine plus vitamin C, and the other ones have just morphine. And then when the experiment starts, they then can press the button and get more. So the ones who just had morphine go for more and more and more and more until they find their level, and then they're hooked. And the ones given vitamin C, not really interested. Here is a study on omega-3, similar thing, that chronically morphine induced addiction, animals given omega-3s are not really so interested in morphine, heroin. So here's the big paradox of recovery. Recovery requires abstinence. Abstinence-based symptoms interfere with the ability to stay clean or sober or drug-free. And some of these symptoms last for months or years into sobriety or never go away. So how would you feel if you quit? Chronic abstinence symptoms that come after acute withdrawal. So you abstain, you clean up, you get acute withdrawal symptoms, you get over them, but then you have these chronic abstinence symptoms. And chronic abstinence symptoms are feeling problems, mood problems, stress sensitivity, you can't deal with stress, cognitive dysfunction, you can't think straight, sleep problems, you can't sleep, you're accident prone, craving, stimulus augmentation means you can't deal with strong light, loud music, anything else. And these are chronic abstinence symptoms that can go on for a very long time. In my book, How to Quit Without Feeling Shit, which is also should be here now, but we'll have copies for you for sure in a few days. And also on the website, howtoquit.co.uk, is a scale of abstinence symptom severity. And the way it works, like here, is craving or drug hunger from 0 to 10, or anxiety from 0 to 10. So you can score yourself. And drug cravings, sugar cravings, salt cravings, that relates to the adrenals, depression, anxiety, internal shaking, trembling, restlessness, impulsivity, lack of energy, hypersensitivity to noise, pain, stress, etc., negative self-talk, sense of emptiness, and so on. So abstinence-based symptoms are not emotional or psychological. They result from deficiency in the brain's neurotransmitter system. These are the same brain chemical deficits that led to self-medication with mood-altering substances in the first place, and then to addiction. Recovery requires treating the brain. So here is a person who's doing his score. So he's got a total score of 78, right? What we do is we measure the brain's levels of neurotransmitters and then create an intravenous drip containing the amino acids plus a few B vitamins and vitamin C that relate to their burnout. So for a cocaine addict, it's very different to a heroin addict and so on. And then give that intravenously for a period of a few days. The reason is that in serious alcoholism and heroin addiction, the gut is completely messed up. So if you can get the nutrients straight into the bloodstream. So here's 6 days later, okay? Gone from that, and this person's already quit. This is how they feel. It's gone from that to that, a score of 78 to 7 after 6 intravenous infusions of the appropriate nutrients for them.
Is that lasting?
Yeah, I'm going to show you. Would you be ready to quit if you knew you didn't have to go through the discomfort you experienced when you tried to quit in the past? How to unaddict your brain. So untreated, there's a high risk of addiction, makes it difficult to focus and benefit from any counseling or psychotherapy, creates long-term pain and discomfort in sobriety, and creates a high risk of relapse. With a healthy brain, you have less or no drug, alcohol cravings, you have an improved sense of happiness, you can think more clearly, you can concentrate, you feel calmer, you have more emotional balance, more energy, ability to manage stress, and healthy sleep. So Joan Matthews Larson's Recovery Center, based upon this approach, here she is reporting before and after treatment, change in mood swings, anxiety, memory, irritability, tremors, shaking, depression, insomnia, chronic fatigue. But I'm going to show you a bit of my own research with my co-authors, Professor David Miller, Professor of Addiction Studies, and the late Dr. James Brawley. So in our book, we have 12 keys of recovery, which I won't need to go through because you understand so many of them, but I will talk a bit about rebalancing your brain with amino acids, rebuild your brain with essential fats, we kind of understand, raise your methyl IQ with vitamins and minerals, we know about that. In our study on alcoholics, a plasma homocysteine concentration is associated with craving hazardous and harmful patterns of alcohol consumption. Get the homocysteine down in alcoholism. repair your brain with antioxidants. I won't say too much about that, but you're a nutritionist. You know a lot about antioxidants. Balance your blood sugar. Healthy brain needs a healthy gut. So we've been speaking about the gut. So having a lot of antioxidant-rich foods, brightly colored beetroots, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, mustard, turmeric, blueberries, all those wonderfully rich sources, butternut squash, sweet potato, and so on. Solving food allergies. So is there a yeast? A lot of people who think that they react to alcohol are reacting to yeast, I mean, this is slightly off the addiction thing, but I was on a TV channel. They gave me this woman who they described as the worst IBS sufferer, terrible bloating. And she assumed that she was wheat allergic. She went to a restaurant, and this was a couple of weeks before I met her, and she had a lager and naan bread, Indian restaurant, and a curry. And she bloated so badly, her trousers just split, and she had to make a rather strategic retreat from the restaurant. She thought she was wheat allergic, and when we tested her, she was actually yeast and cashew allergic. And there was cashew in the curry, cashew in the bread, yeast in the beer. She was not wheat intolerant at all. So a lot of alcoholics are reacting to brewers' yeast. So it's kind of rejuvenate your liver, get a good night's sleep. And I think we've kind of spoken about sleep and how terribly, terribly, terribly important it is. There's a very good book called Why We Sleep, which you might want to read. And we've spoken about 5-HTP and melatonin and silence of peace and GABA. Also the Montmorency cherry. I don't know if you can buy this here, but we get this thing called Cherry Active, which is a pure concentrate. It has melatonin in it, and some people find a shot of Montmorency juice helps them a lot. Endorphin-raising exercises, generating vital energy, qi, yoga, tai chi, martial arts, meditation, getting out nature, getting your past out of your future. So that's kind of the book. When a person has proper nutrition, eliminates toxins, reduces stress, exercises, and sleeps well, the brain does heal. So these are the 8 essential amino acids. And for you nutritionists, if anybody wants to write this down and share it, it's Lucy lysine isolated, took 3 trips on methylated, Val her pal came on the scene and gave her phenylalanine. Right? Leucine, lysine isolated, took 3 trips, threonine, tryptophan on methylated, methionine, Val, valine, her pal, came on the scene and gave her phenylalanine. Right? That's how you remember them. So you can see, for example, from taurine and glutamine, we make GABA. From phenylalanine, we make tyrosine, makes dopamine, makes noradrenaline, makes, etc. So every neurotransmitter, has an amino acid precursor. And that's kind of good to know. Quick studies giving amino acids, significantly lower abstinence symptoms with amino acids and B vitamins. The relapse for the amino acid group was 15% compared to 50% for the controls. Stimulant addicts, amphetamines, for example, cocaine, much less drug hunger, 50% lower than the control, and a dropout rate of only 4.6 compared to 37% for the control. Carbohydrate cravers, same thing. The amino acids, they lost an average of 27 pounds, had a relapse rate of 18%. The control group lost 10 pounds and a relapse rate of 82%. So is cocaine desire reduced by acetylcysteine? If we had more time, I would talk about N-acetylcysteine, a precursor for glutathione. And while taking N-acetylcysteine versus placebo, the participants have less desire for cocaine. So N-acetylcysteine is very good for that. I love this study conceptually because what it did was it took gamblers, pathological gamblers, and gave them placebo or N-acetylcysteine. And of those assigned to N-acetylcysteine, 83.3% met responder criteria at the end of the double-blind phase compared to only 28% of those assigned to placebo. So here you have a gambler, doesn't want to gamble, when they're on an acetyl, on an amino acid versus a placebo, right? Doesn't matter if it's a behavioral addiction. It's still the same chemistry. So one of the gold in the book, and a lot of these forms are downloadable, is this chart which says this is the neurotransmitter, this is the amino acid it's made from, this is what it does, this is how you feel when you're deficient, and this is the substance you're going to crave if you are deficient. So the way we use this is you can have a client and say, well, how are you feeling? And they say, I feel depressed, obsessive, low self-esteem, sleep problems, and fearfulness. So you know that, this is a serotonin issue. And they're probably going to go for alcohol, sugar, chocolate, tobacco, marijuana. And what's really going to help them, is tryptophan or 5-HTP. Or you can do it the other way around. You can say, what's your drug of choice? What do you use? Well, I like caffeine and cocaine. And, that means that it's tyrosine or its precursor, phenylalanine, that's going to reduce your craving for that. So this is a very useful chart in the book. So now to answer your question, long term, does it stick? How effective is the How to Quit program? So the usual relapse rates, failure rates, and by the way, to be honest, this is very generous, is that 40 to 50% who go into treatment recovery will relapse within the first 30 days. 60 to 70% will relapse within 90 days, and 75 to 80% will relapse within 6 months. And probably 90% will relapse before the year is up. It's it may be worse than that. Some say that 5% are clean at the end of a 1-year program. A 1 year from detoxifying. On average, 1 in 10 are clean or sober after a year, and 1 in 20 after 5 years. So here we have a study using the abstinence symptom severity score. That's our measure. 2 groups. One group is given supplements, oral supplements, and the other is given intravenous for the first 5 days. The intravenous ones have an average symptom severity score a bit higher. So they start off at 114 on admission. After 1 week, they're down to 36. And then 30 days, they're down to 29. Those on the supplements, they started at 88, dropped to 60, and then to 40. So 75% reduction in abstinence symptom severity on the scale, and versus 55% on the oral supplements. So here is a study where we went to a treatment center, Bridge the Gap on the east coast of the States, and we said we want 24. We don't want you to change anything you're doing. There's an AA 12-step approach, exercise, good food. Don't change anything you're doing. We want 24, a couple of dozen of your patients or residents, and we'll just do our thing. 1 month of supplementation, 5 days of intravenous, and then we're out of here. And the condition is you've got to follow them up after 6 months and 12 months. And this is what we're talking about. This is a cocaine, methadone addicts. This is six times. This is their 7th time. Alcohol, polydrug, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the spread. 3 times, 3rd time in for alcohol, And this is basically what happened. So we actually started with 23. After 6 months, 21 out of 23, 91% was sober. And 19 out of 23 had not one single relapse. And after a year or more, some of them it was a bit longer, of those initial 23, 91%, 21 are sober, and 70% have had not one single relapse. Yes?
Was it built in with a placebo?
What?
Was it built in with a placebo?
No, this is not a placebo trial. This is just taking 23 people, measuring doing the blood test, giving them 5 days intravenous, 1 month supplements, and then getting out of the way and seeing where they're at the end of the year. So in a sense, the control group is what happens to the rest, which was pretty much what I you know what I showed you. So there's the how to quit diet, the how to quit lifestyle, and the how to quit supplements. Eating properly is just as important as supplementing, and taking supplements is no excuse to eat junk. So, you know, we always start with the basics: good high-strength multivitamin, extra vitamin C, extra essential fats, plus phospholipids. You've got to rebuild the brain. And in the book, you know, this is the basics, and then depending upon the addiction, and this includes, for example, antidepressant addiction, we add in very specific things. If the homocysteine is high, you've got to correct that. If they're not sleeping, you've got to correct that. If there's liver problems, you have to correct that. If there's digestive problems, you have to correct that. So I'm not going to go through it all, but I'm just showing you that it exists. So there's a sort of a process in the book, and if you are, you know, alcohol is your area, then there are certain nutrients called chill nutrients. I'll explain them. Methyl nutrient means lowering homocysteine. Omega-3 is terribly important. Vitamin C is terribly important, and you know, this is the dose, and that's. I wish, this doesn't seem to be available anymore, but a couple of years ago, there was this brilliant comedy, a 6-part comedy on BBC called Ill Behaviour. And it was hilarious. And basically what it was this guy who was a total loser. His high-powered wife, who worked in the stock market, dumped him and just said, "Bugger off, you're a loser," but left him with £1 million. And he was about to kill himself because he'd done nothing in life of any worth at all. But then it turned out that his best mate from school had cancer. I think it was a nasty cancer. And he thought, you know, I've done nothing in my life of any significance, but, you know, now I've got to help this guy. And he looks it up and he realizes that he's got to have chemo, you know, to cure his cancer. It's possible. But his friend, who was an alcoholic and has cleaned up, he's not going to have any chemo. He's gone down the natural route. He's having enemas. He's making wheatgrass juice. You know, he's seeing healers. He's doing the whole lot. So, you know, his friend decides he's going to have to kidnap him and force him to have chemotherapy. And he finds this oncologist who's just about to be struck off. She calls her patients the living dead and has had sex with quite a few and is always consuming some drug or other, who stiffs him for a vast amount of money to become the one that's going to now deliver chemo to his friend that he's captured in the castle, who's all chained up. Anyway, his friend persuades her, "You are a drug addict and a sex addict, and you really need to quit." And there she was in bed reading How to Quit Without Feeling Shit. I just thought it was quite funny. But anyway, that's the book, and howtoquit.co.uk is the website. There's a lot of useful information on there. You can click on your addiction, and it kind of gives you a summary of what to do. And there's a lot of very useful appendices, how to get the liver to recover and so on, which we couldn't fit into the book. And there's a section on treatment centres, which is extraordinarily empty, because we hope for a future when there'll be a treatment centre in Denmark that is using this in addition to what they're doing, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's basically it, really. A pleasure.